You do see me?
Hi. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. My name is Carlos Bedoya, and I have the pleasure of being one of the graduate assistants at Columbus State University, together with my friend Riley. Riley, you can say hi. Riley is my colleague. He's also a graduate assistant here. And we're really thankful to Dr. Sohn, to the Schwab School of Music, and everyone involved in making this event happen, even though we're far apart. So I would like to get started by introducing this conversation. First of all, one of the members of the team, Erdon Lee, who is Dr. Sohn's duet partner, he came up with the idea of having a panel conversation with professors from schools of the United States, so that people who are interested in possibly applying to study guitar in the United States, they can have their questions answered by some of the best pedagogues in the United States themselves. So this is more or less the aim for this conversation. And for this conversation panel today, we're very, very happy to be joined by Jason Vio, Grammy Award winner, professor at the Curtis Institute of Music and Cleveland Institute of Music. We're also joined by Professor Julian Gray, professor at the Peabody Institute and Shenandoah Conservatory. And we're also joined by
Carlos, I'm sorry. Forgive me, Carlos. I think there's a technical problem. Dr. McCabe says that you need to open the Zoom chat.
So why? There is a chat open. There's a chat open on mine. Is that from my end?
I mean, I'm hearing everybody. Sounds good.
So anyway, we're also joined by Professor Adam Holzman, professor of guitar at the University of Austin, Texas, Butler School of Music. And we're really, really fortunate to have such amazing pedagogues and guitarists join us today. And of course, we're also joined by Dr. Andrew Sohn, who is the head of the guitar studies here at Schwab School of Music. And you will also see faces of the guitar students at our studio right now. So yeah, say hi, thank you. So I also would like to announce that in case you have a question, and I'm talking to those of you in the chat who are watching us live from YouTube or Facebook, if you have a question, you can type your questions and Riley is going to direct them to me and we're gonna make them available to the professors immediately. And also to the students, my colleagues, you can also at any point ask a question so that we make this conversation fluid. So to get started, I would like to start with a question.
You and Carlos administrators, you can just chat amongst the three of yourselves.
I'm not in this.
So we have to get the conversation started. We're going to have a question from Ben Lougheed from Florida. And he asked, what are the most important attributes that you look for when evaluating a student for acceptance into your program? And we can get started with whomever wants to start and we'll get the conversation going from there. So how about we get started with Professor Holzman?
Okay. Well, the question really would hinder. The answer would hinder a bit would hinge a bit on whether or not it's an undergraduate student, a graduate student, or a doctoral student, because I'm looking for different things at different levels. In an undergraduate student, I don't expect the student to be maybe as technically advanced or as musically knowledgeable. But the first thing I'm always looking for is just what I like to call light in their eyes. And that's a sense of intelligence, personality, love of music, and then hopefully as advanced a foundation of technique as I can find, and what I like to call an innate musicality. And then anything above that is all gravy. So that's for the undergraduate level. For to go to the other end, a doctoral level, I'm looking for somebody where I don't have to fix a lot. I expect them to be really smart, really bright, really intelligent, really loving music, playing at a high level, and their level of technique is pretty well formed, and we're going to get to work on the really fun, finer points of detailing the music that we're playing, depending on style and time and composer. In the master's level, It's really somewhere in between that. I mean, I've been fortunate to have some spectacular master's students who were, already at the doctoral level, and then others that we had to make some formative changes to. But the bottom line is always, like I said, I like to call it light in the student's eyes, the wish to learn, the want to learn, and then foundational technique as much as I can get. So, pass it over to Jay and Jason.
Yeah, I would. That sounds pretty much right on. I mean, you look at their instrumental technical potential within the context of their. I look at their natural facility. These are all things you can kind of see within a few minutes of playing, really. But also their experience level on the instrument is also factors into that as well. So if someone's not been playing for all that long, you have to take that into account versus somebody that's been playing, 10, 15 years, and they're all, and where they're really at, their comfort level around the instrument. You're gauging those things. Yes. And again, this is very similar to what Adam said, their musical and artistic potential. These things are evaluated pretty easily within a few short pieces, if not in some cases like in a few minutes. I mean, you can really kind of get a good sense of what someone's about with what they're playing. High music IQ, that kind of musical intelligence and personal responsibility and character are also really, really important, especially in a studio for a long haul type of thing. Just what their character is as a person is also pretty important. Not just for the studio, but for them going forward, to take them as a student, like going forward. Do they have a lot of potential as a professional, as a people person type of thing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I agree with both of you on all of the main points that you mentioned. And Jason, I think, you just brought up a good point, which is that looking at somebody's history with the instrument, if somebody's played for 10 years, seriously, and if somebody's played for 3 years seriously, then you're going to factor that in. That becomes part of like the algorithm for sure. And Adam, I totally agree with you that particularly, I mean, for all students, but as you say, the light in the eyes, that a certain kind of openness, an attitude of engagement and intelligence in the talking part of an audition. Because remember, an audition, there are two aspects to it. One is obviously the performance part, and the other is just how you're going to engage the professor or the teacher that you're talking with. I mean, the interesting thing about our business is that because it's so talent driven, that and look, I mean, Andrew, Adam, Jason, I mean, you all are like, heads of all incredible guitar programs, and we experience this all the time. I mean, you can like undergrad, master's, grad, there's not necessarily like a straight line in terms of what you're going to see in playing. And you can certainly have an 18-year-old bachelor's candidate that could be in advance of a doctoral candidate in some respects. So you're really, I mean, I think, probably for all of us, we're really looking in an individual way. But and I also look, I have to say, within the short amount of time that we have, I think sense of humor also kind of indicates a certain kind of intelligence. And I always think of musicality as being, I mean, if I had to define musicality, it would be spontaneous reaction to matter. That like things come at you and like, how do you handle it? And so, I mean, that humor has something to say with that. And also, I've never known a good or great musician who wasn't smart. The idea that it's anything other than that is just an absolute myth. And so, I mean, as Adam led off with, that there's a certain kind of bearing that you see in somebody that if you're going to be working with them, that they're going to be engaged in the discovery that you're going to have with them over years, God willing. Yeah.
So following this same conversation, one of the questions that I got submitted to us, the person wished to remain anonymous, but they wanted to ask, what is the point difference from when you have to decide for example, that person directed more the question towards Jason and the Curtis Institute of Music. They asked, since all the players are at such a high level, what is the main difference, or what is it that separates, or what is it that makes you make the decision over one person over the other? And this can also be geared towards, for example, in your respective schools, when you're going to give a graduate assistantship, for example, in Austin, Texas, or in Shenandoah or the Peabody Institute, what is that difference that separates who you're going to decide over from? And again, the person wished to remain anonymous.
Well, in regard to Curtis, it is a little bit of a different situation, I think, than say, for example, Cleveland Institute of Music. Cleveland Institute of Music at the bachelor level, we change a lot of people's, a lot of students playing over the course of 4 years, and because Colin and I can do that, and make that difference, we're willing to, kind of take on someone who's not necessarily fully developed in the technical sense or musical. And also, the idea of a conservatory is that the theory program with, Cleveland Institute of Music, eurythmics, and all the things around what they're also studying is really meant to help build all those things together, and so that the student, if they have the intelligence to do it, they start to assimilate those things, and they become really an organic part of the way they tackle a piece of music. Curtis is a bit different in the sense that, a professional quality technical command of the instrument, and to a certain extent, along with a pretty high level of musicianship, and even, we're really kind of looking for artistry. The previous two things are almost like a prerequisite. And so, or a foregone conclusion, and you're kind of looking for a spark. It's something of where there's it's kind of an artistic thing, which is hard to quantify, and it's hard to, it's not an easy thing to develop either with a student. So we've had several really high level technical players at Curtis audition, but not advance into the studio, because they either didn't invest in musicianship training, like meaning understanding how music is actually put together, which is, more of a science actually than I think a lot of people think. It's not just some kind of accidental thing. Or developing a voice, which is a little bit more kind of ephemeral type of thing, like developing an artistic voice. Which is hard to do for somebody. I don't really believe that just everybody is necessarily going to automatically have like an artistic vision or a voice or anything like that. So you're kind of looking for that. If you see a spark in that, you can help develop it. But really, like, I think some of the word around Curtis is that, about the Curtis thing is that well, they're already finished, they're already ready to go. And that's not also really true. I mean, there's always like a lot of work left to do, with the students there. So.
Well, and Jason, that's sort of the case? I mean, that's kind of the case for all the instruments at Curtis, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, the strings and and piano, and I mean, when you have a school that, also the size of the school. And,
yeah.
So.
Otherwise, why would they be going? I mean, why would they be going there? What would the point be? So
think a musical finishing school in a way.
It's a bit like that, but they still have some things like, I mean, I was surprised, as I got to. I mean, there's a lot of players that we've had from the get-go that 11 years ago that have come from that have studied through the either Shanghai or Beijing, and I was really shocked actually how many students really had never really experienced bass stamping beyond basically playing a rest stroke from a lower adjacent string into an upper adjacent string. So there's all these, there's plenty of like little things like that are kind of like, well, they just hadn't done it. So there's always these various things musically and technically that are, I mean, there's just thousands of technical things, and fingerings too. Fingerings, like you could spend years on fingerings.
Go ahead, Professor Adam.
I can't remember what the rest of the question was. I know the first. I was engaged by Jay. I was listening to Jason's answer. It was great. What was the rest of the question, Carlos?
So when you're going to pick, for example, if you guys have a graduate assistantship or a fellowship, what is it that divides those high players from the others when you're about to pick?
Okay, well, like my colleagues, my program has for a long time been filled with a lot of advanced players. And so I have the luxury, in most cases, I almost always choose my graduate assistant to answer the TA question, the TA from within my program. Almost always. Somebody who I feel is smart, mature, responsible, caring, empathetic. I look for somebody who's a great family member. Because actually this goes back to our first question, and I didn't mention it, and Jay and Julian did, and I mean, I always consider my program a family. And I talk to my kids about that all the time, that the students in this room are going to be your friends for the next 40 or 50 years, if all goes right. In fact, I think Jay and I have known each other for about 40 years, and we weren't students together, but we've known each other that long through the guitar, and it's a wonderful thing. And for the TA, I'm usually looking I don't often use it as a recruitment tool, although I have over the years. My current TA, for example, who was one of Dr. Zone's former incredible students, came as a master's student with the TA. So that was where I broke my own rule, but I really wanted to work with him and have him come join us in Austin. So I broke my own rule, and I knew him well enough and Dr. Zone raved about him, so I trusted him to be the right type of person, and he's now matriculating for 3 more years with the same assistantship. So as far as fellowships, that's usually incoming personnel. And so there it's really competitive, and it has to do with really just who plays the best and who has that spark, as Jason was saying. I mean, that in that level of playing, I want to see that musical spark. They've got to make me go, that was good, make me smile. And so the fellowship is a little different, although very often that TA person is a very similar person to that. And certainly in my current TA, he fits both of those. But very often it's a person from within the program who has just excelled and matured throughout the program, and just is the perfect leader of the and helper of the other students.
Well, and as Adam just said, I mean, since this is specifically asking about auditioning, every year is different. And I can think of some years where, and remember that the GA, like a teaching assistant, graduate assistant, they're going to have some administrative and possibly instructional responsibilities. So you have to take that into account when you're determining that position. But certainly, I mean, what one hopes is that with a GA, that you would get a really top flight player who would also have the qualities of responsibility and organizational skills that you're really going to want from somebody that you're going to rely on to be doing, some administrative things in the school. And, like as Adam just said, I mean, a lot of times it could be a person that's done a previous degree with you, that their qualities. But for example, so right now, this year, my GA is a master's student who did a bachelor's with me. And I knew that he would be wonderful in that role because I had experienced the kind of person he was for 4 years. But before that, the GA was a new MA student from Brazil. And I mean, I got, he presented himself. He was probably 28, 29 years old, and as a doctoral student, and so I had a very good feeling that he would be able to handle the responsibilities, and he did, like, marvelously. So the GA is a kind of, and as Adam just said, I mean, the GA has scholarship with it, but there are scholarships that aren't going to be attached to a GA. So the GA really is about, like, organizational responsibility too, in addition to being like the best player you can find for that role, I think. Yeah.
Great. So in order, let's switch gears a little bit and think about the actual audition process. And we have a question, also another person who wished to remain anonymous, and they asked, to all the professors, during auditions, do you see it more of a performance, or is it more of this, discovering the potential of the student? And I'm not sure if I understand the question well, but do you see it more like a performance or discovering the potential of the student? This is an anonymous question.
Well, both. I mean, you are looking for potential because this is when you're evaluating potential students, you're looking uh, at somebody that you're going to be working with for years. So potential would definitely come into that. Um, I mean, whenever I'm counseling young players, I actually do advise them to make sure when they're auditioning to play like it's a performance. That you want to play who you are, you want to play what you do, and don't try and play what you don't do. That you play within your voice and within your technical capabilities. I mean, for sure. I mean, when you're choosing repertoire, it's much better to play if you're looking at like how difficult the skill level is of the piece that you're playing. It's much better, I think, to play a piece that's on a slightly lower skill level that you play really well than to try and pick a piece that you feel it's at a higher skill level. I'll get extra points for that, but that's not that you don't have authority over. It's better, I think, to be conservative about that. But I mean, I am looking for how the person performs. But as Jason mentioned before, I mean, you are looking. I mean, the potential part, sure, because it isn't a performance. It's about starting a relationship that could last 4 or 6 years.
True. I mean, but at the same time, I think your life will be simpler if you just treat everything, every run through like a performance. I mean, if I'm playing at my uh, daughter's preschool, I'm going to be warming up and practicing and do an hour at least session beforehand and do my whole thing. And I think there's something that's good about dressing the part and dressing like you're going to be on stage, and not wearing jeans and sneakers and white socks and stuff like that. Like you want to, it is a performance. So even if I'm playing for, my cut, my sister-in-law or something, or my mother-in-law or something, I got to run through a thing. I really, I think it's good. It's a good habit to get into, that anytime you're going to actually have a run through of it, that you kind of, you go into your zone and you do the thing, in that sense. But yes, what Julian is saying, the preparation beforehand, or the thought process beforehand, is, yeah, don't play pieces that are like reach pieces. It's good to study reach pieces and practice reach pieces, but you should be doing your wheelhouse thing, the ones that are in your wheelhouse for auditions, because you're really trying to put your best foot forward, the thing that, that's really going to make you look like an attractive candidate.
I would answer, well, I guess to answer the specific question, I think Julian and Jason have done a great job. I think it's a combination of both. It's a performance, and it's I'm watching to see, can I help this person? Are there things that I can help this person grow with? And then in the interview, I find out how receptive that person is to the growth. So in that part, I would say that. As to the other issues that have come up in this, which I think are great, I have two other things. One is I don't have a chalkboard to do this on. In the old days, when we had a chalkboard in the classroom, the first studio class every semester, every year, not so there's usually new students, I would draw a number line. It's the only time in the whole semester, honestly, I would ever actually draw on a chalkboard. But I would draw just a long line, and I'd write born, then I'd write a little another notch, start to practice, and then I'd make all of these squiggles up and down, and then I'd write die. Right? And the point of that, what I was saying to the students, was life, every performance you give, Every performance, all the wonderful ones Jason was referring to, are a series of experiences. And from every experience, if you're a living, learning human, you should draw and grow in some way from each of them. Sometimes it's not always a positive experience. It might not be our best performance, but sometimes we learn more from the negative performances than we do from the great ones. I think all of us would probably remember our weakest performances more than we remember our greatest performances. I can always quote my first bad review. I know exactly what concert hall it was in, and the name of the reviewer in the paper. Luckily I've forgotten the date because I can't remember stuff like that. But it's those are the things we remember, and so life is a series of experiences, and each performance we grow from. Now, the third part that was touched on, that I think is crucial. I have this rule with my students: when you go to a competition, you never play something that allows the person to look under the hood. If they can see what's under the hood, in other words, what's wrong in the playing, you're playing the wrong piece, baby. Or you're not ready for this particular event. So that's a rule I have. My students, when they're going to a competition, they're playing pieces where even guys like Dr. Zone and Julian and Jason and I, even we have to go, that's pretty good. I don't see the weakness yet. That's what I'm looking for when I'm preparing my top flight students to a competition. You're going to have to really look to see the weakness. Whether it's a technical weakness or a musical weakness. Now, not everybody can attain that, but that's our goal. So
we have a couple of questions regarding competitions, but before we jump there, I'm sorry, Julian, Professor Gray, go ahead.
I don't want to you're doing a great job, Carlos. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Just a couple of things, because there are things that both Adam and Jason said that I think it's really important to think about. Jason was just saying, like, no matter where he's playing, that you treat it all the same, that there's the same level of commitment, the same level of professional responsibility. And that's something that's so important for students to remember, and that really great players, they don't categorize, like, they always are aiming to play their best. I know, like, when my former duo partner, Ron Pearl, and I, when we rehearse, when we would, you stop and you talk and things, but when we would cue the beginnings, like, we wanted to be just as precise as we would be on a concert stage. It wasn't like, yeah, we can be a little sloppy now because, like, it's just us in the room. It's like, it doesn't work like that. And I just wanted to kind of reiterate that Schumann, in his notes to young musicians, once said, you should practice always as if there were a master in the room. And that's a key. And then Adam, he mentioned practicing. Yeah, born, practice, die. One thing I always tell my students is that when we talk about practice, sometimes I think we can have the wrong idea about what that word means. A lot of times people think practicing is where I mess up and then make it better. But I look at, obviously we do learn, but practicing, as I think about it, is if somebody's a lawyer, they say they practice law. If you're a doctor, you're a practicing doctor. And to be in the practice of medicine doesn't mean that you're messing up until you get it right for some future patient. It means that you're using whatever your full capabilities are at that moment to do the best job that you can. And that's going to evolve and change, but that's how I see practicing in any case. Sorry, Carl.
No, thank you, Professor Gray, for your input. So I wanted to kind of close off this segment about auditions before we move on to a conversation about competitions, because we have several questions about that. So in order to close off this segment, what will be one good thing that you have seen people do in an audition and one bad thing that you would say, don't do it? We can go really quickly. Let's start with Professor Holzman.
One of my students 2 years ago was auditioning at one of our, I won't name the school, but he was auditioning at one of our great schools, guitar schools in the country, for his master's. So he goes, and he's a fabulous young player, who really wonderful player. And he goes out and he comes home, and I said, so how'd the audition go? And he said, well, it didn't go that well. And I said, why? You've been playing great, everything. And I said, did you get sleep? He says, well, on Wednesday I decided that I was going to go on this crash diet where I ate only, potato skins and Cheetos, and coffee. It's one of these, I can't remember what kind of diet it was, like a high protein diet or anything. And I said, let me get this straight. You decided to make a major life change 2 days before one of the most important auditions you were going to do. And he goes, yeah, I thought it would be. And I said, stop. I said, don't say another word and never do that again. I said, that's not to say that you might not want to go through that kind of life change at another point, but don't ever make that kind of severe change right before an audition. So I'll give that example as something not to do, or performance.
My dad, and I think his dad used to say, "Dance with who brung you."
There you go. Great. Perfect. Yeah. So I will say in that student's case, he went to another one of our great schools and didn't do that again, and is there now studying. So very happy for him. But I shook him by the shoulders almost. I was so upset that he would do that, and I then incorporate that as something I say to my students all the time now. As many things that I say when they go to audition: have a warm piece of clothing you can throw on, whether it's a sweater. All those kinds of things. Have a fiber bar with you in your case. Have something to eat beforehand. Just get a lot of sleep. All the necessities to play your best. That's what I would recommend.
How about you, Professor Gray?
Well, first off, Adam, I do like the idea of that potato skin and Cheeto.
I just came up with that, Jay. That's a new diet. I'm on that now.
I avail myself of that this week. It sounds intriguing. So Carlos, you were saying what are in terms of an audition, what's a mistake you can make, and then what?
You can say one good thing to do and one thing that is not very good to do.
Okay, well, this once again, along with what Adam just said. Look, everything in life is rhythmic, and what Adam was talking about, somebody like short-circuited their rhythm by doing things differently before they needed to perform, before they needed to deliver, and that's always probably not a good idea. So the best thing would be, but this also means that as you're practicing, I think part of being a student where you're preparing for a professional performance career is that you really are settling into what is going to be your rhythm for preparing to perform. Look, we've all made recordings, and I'm sure every single one of us knows. All four of us know exactly when we need to change the bass strings, so that they'll be optimal the day that you start performing. When you change performing when you're recording, when you change your treble strings, that's probably not going to be the same. But you better not count on discovering that before you make your first recording. Those are things you should be experimenting with, so that you know precisely what works for you. So Carlos, I think the one thing to do is know what your rhythms are, know what your body rhythms are, know what your guitar rhythms are. If you're don't over practice. So another mistake would be, and this can be a common thing for recitals too, is folks start over practicing something that they don't have the stamina for, and then basically they carry fatigue into an audition or performance situation. So somebody all of a sudden becomes highly ethical and moral about their slurs, and making sure that their hammer-ons and pull-outs are just so, and speak clearly, and then they start practicing slurs for an hour and 20 minutes a day just before a performance or audition. That would be a mistake. So one of the things is that, and I think this is something else that all successful musicians do, is that they have a sense of what are short-term projects, and then they have a sense of what are longer-term projects. And if you mix those up before an audition or a performance, then you can carry fatigue into an audition, and that will not help you.
Anything to add, Professor Bio?
Yeah, it's interesting. As I just before this, I had a lesson. It's part of a GFA project, actually, a lesson with a student that I'm doing a few lessons with over the year, and was working on the first movement of the Castle Tedesco Concerto. And in the first guitar entrance, there's like a short tremolo section, and we're going through the fingerings and what to do. And I said, this is kind of right. The tendency, or there's always the temptation is to rush this part because it's not really that fast, the tremolo. And of course, he was rushing it. He said, "Well, do you have any exercises for that for this part?" I said, "Well, that passage is a pretty good exercise for it." Like sometimes you just got to practice the actual thing that you're going to play, and not get too neurotic about like what Julian's saying, like put all these other, things about it. Sometimes it's just best to just, to work on what it is that you're going to actually, perform. I would say, yeah, just, be personable, that kind of thing, because that also is part of the audition process. That's not necessarily part of a formal performance. I think dressing the part is good. I'm not saying you have to wear a tux or even a suit and tie. I just think that looking decent. I've just seen so many students that like literally wear jeans and high tops or whatever, and white socks, and I just think that's not. It just kind of looks like you're not really taking it all that seriously. Don't look at the faculty whilst you are playing. That's all. I mean, I don't care, but I know that it's a little bit it can be very disconcerting for some. And also, hey man is not how you should address. Just a pro tip there. Hey man, it's not really going to ingratiate you to. It's not the safe bet.
Right. Or dude.
Dude.
How about you, Dr. Zone, if you want to add anything, do and don'ts for auditions?
Well, I kind of changed my idea about what I'm looking for in students. I had hopefully my last super talented problem child about 10 years ago. And I swore never again was that was going to be the sole, issue of whether they get into school or not. So typically, we don't go by regular school audition dates for guitar. They're usually in touch with me a year before anyway. We're back and forth, and they'll just make an individual time to come to Columbus. I'll hear their audition. We'll have a short lesson, and then I take them to lunch. And it's probably the lunch is more important than the audition. In terms of, I really want, and I hope my students feel this way, that there is a sense of community in the guitar studio, that we're all supportive of each other, that we all have a common direction, and et cetera. When you don't have that, it's really damaging. So, I think I echo the other people, and I'm looking for character in the student. I can teach almost anybody how to play the guitar, but I can't teach people how to have character.
Andrew,
Great. So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Professor Gray.
That's okay, Carlos. You go ahead.
So I wanted to change gears right now and delve into this subject of competitions. We have several questions, and the first one is from Fan Fang from our own studio, and she asks, "What is your opinion on sending students to competitions, and how to deal with disappointing with not winning or placing?"
Well, I think you have to talk. Okay, so sorry, guys. I just
No, go ahead.
sort of did. So first of all, I don't send my students to competitions. You talk with your students. Some of them are interested in competitions. Some of them aren't. And I mean, one of the things with my students that I talk about is that the competition should the student. The student shouldn't be serving the competition, and I mean, I think one my other three esteemed colleagues here. I mean, we all have to deal with this issue, but um, you you have to talk very seriously with your student about competitions, and then also target the correct competition for the student. I just yesterday in a lesson was talking with two students, and one of them was talking about. Well, Adam, you okay? Oh, okay. Um, thought you fell there, Adam.
I didn't, but my computer did. Sorry about that, guys.
Like, okay. Um, I had two different conversations with two different students yesterday during their lesson. One of them was they're both interested in competitions, and one of them was talking about um, making an application for like what's going to be one of the most competitive competitions that you could like say. I mean, let's take it out of the realm of hypothetical. Let's say like GFA. I do think that when you're counseling your students on this, talking with them about that there are different echelon of competitions, and picking a competition that fits the skill level of the student, so that they can enjoy it, and so that they have the possibility of having like a positive outcome, which doesn't mean only that they're going to win a prize. You can have a positive outcome without winning one of the top prizes. And I had a student one time went to the GFA. I didn't think they were quite ready, but they were a really good player. And when they came back, this was a number of years ago. When they came back, I mean, they didn't move on to the finals, which didn't surprise me. But they actually got 3 concerts out of it from concert series because they were a good player. I mean, a really good player. So you never know what's going to happen with that. So choosing the right competition, and then the other thing Carlos mentioning, like how do you deal with disappointment? That's also, you have to talk. If you have a student doing a competition, you must talk with them about what success is, and that if success is only winning one of the top 3 prizes, then I think that I don't even think that's the right framework or attitude to go into a competition with, because there are just so many other things that are important besides that. I mean, the most important thing is to be prepared, and then make sure that you're in an environment where you can thrive. And if you're in a competition that's outside of your skill set, it's not going to be a happy experience.
Anything to add, Professor Holzman or Professor Vio?
I think that was a great answer, Julian. I agree with almost all of that. I always sort of surprise my students, and probably will surprise many in this room when I say what I'm about to say. I think the concept of music or art competition is a terrible concept, and I just think the concept itself, that you're comparing art against art, or music against music, or a player against a player, it has bothered me most of my adult non-competing life. When I was competing as a younger player, I loved the competition. I loved playing the guitar, and I loved competing, and that was a personal thing. Not all people feel that way. So what I do tell my students is what the competition is about is how it helps you become a better player. Because you prepare, not the competition itself, not the actual moment of the competition, although that can also help you be a better player. It's the preparation that it teaches you, that it gets you ready for. So the act of getting ready and then going through the cheese grater, or whatever it is, the grinder of the competition, is its own experience. And for some, a very positive experience, and for some, not as positive. But the networking, the meeting other people, I mean, just think about, as we talked about, I mean, Dr. Z and Jason probably first met at the GFA when you guys were competing against each other. I was there, I was judging, and you guys met there, and so you meet and you become friends. It doesn't matter who wins or who loses, you meet and you become friends, and you know each other and you share that life experience that's spectacular. So it's not always about who wins or who loses, it's who you get to meet and who you get to become friends with for many, many years and share all sorts of experiences with. Now, I think it's very important as an educator that we are very honest with our students. And I mean, I on many instances when a student has said, listen, I really want to do that competition, I'd say, that's not something you're ready for. You're just not ready for that. And then I'll say to them, but if you want to go through the experience, I'm not going to stop you. But I think that we'd be better off preparing another year or another 2 years and approaching that when we're ready and maybe doing a different competition first. But again, and Julian touched on this, you have some students who love to compete. It drives them and they get better and better and better all the time. And then you have others, that's not where they play their best. And as a teacher, you have to know that and know that one is not necessarily going to be more successful than the other, but you have to nurture each one in his or her direction, and I think that's a very important thing. So I think competitions themselves are the concept of it, the abstract of it, I'm not a fan of. But the actual doing it and experiences that come by preparation and achievement, or even sometimes by not winning what you expect to win, you have tremendous growth and learning. So.
Yeah, great. I mean, you're just really well said by, Jay and Adam. I don't have a lot to add to that. I just think, but I also have I've always had, I think it's kind of what it's known, an ambivalence about competitions. So it is the teacher's responsibility to kind of, as Adam said, be honest with the student, and just Julian said, put them in the right, if you're going to do them, choose wisely and choose your repertoire. I think playing what you like is important, as long as you're not expecting too much of the outcome. And again, just, knowing, having the awareness of where you're at as a player and knowing what your competition is, because it is a competition around you, like who's entering and all that kind of thing, which became a lot easier with the internet, that's for sure. That's also important. But again, I think kind of going off what I said earlier, I mean, performing for me is a very very pleasurable, enjoyable thing. And I mean, that's kind of what the whole thing is about for me. It's really just sort of being with my guitar, and when it's really happening, I'm just listening. I'm really just kind of in this space where there's not really anything around me, and I'm just really just listening to music. And not unlike a way maybe a conductor, when everything is going right, they're just kind of there and it's happening. And it's not like that, of course, all the time, because it can't be, because we're human. But I think the endeavor of being in that zone and finding this thing of what it is, like I said about auditions, if you treat every run through, to a certain extent like that, you can really handle competitions, I think, better, because you just simply do the thing that you just do your thing, the same thing. I was never into competitions personally for the competition aspect of it. I just want, I found them really unpleasant. And I think, the ones I did well in, I just happened to really be kind of, playing at my optimum level, which meant that I wasn't thinking about anything except the thing, like the actual thing, that I was in the present moment. As the music is going by, this is where my, focus was, like this, like that. And if you can find that space where you're doing that and really sort of practice that when you're performing and really develop that, because performing in itself takes practice. I think the competition thing is a little bit easier to deal with, because then you can kind of block all that other extraneous stuff out of the way.
Dr. Zone, any other thoughts?
Well, one of the things, in terms of, I think, and we're all in agreement with this, is that if you have students that are going to be taking part in competitions, that there are some important discussions and preparation that need to take place with the teacher and the student before that event. And one of the things when I talk with my students about it, and this has a direct carryover into your professional performance career, is to identify the things that you can take care of and identify the things that you can't take care of. That there are certain things that you have control over as a performer, and there are certain things that you have no control over as a performer. And certainly competitions can put that in high relief. If you're thinking about who the judges are, you're thinking about the wrong thing. If you know a particular judge and you think like, oh my God, I'm playing the Merz Hungarian fantasy and I know they hate Merz, then you're thinking about the wrong thing. But none of this is different from when you perform like professionally. I mean, that you really do identify like, what can I take control over, what don't I have control over. The first time Ron and I played at a GFA, I remember very distinct. It was in 1987, and it was Steve Aaron at the University of Akron, and we were pretty Ron and I were pretty unknown. I think it's pretty safe to say at that point, and he very kindly, gave us like a 4:00 slot for our performance, and the day before our performance, a young Los Angeles guitar quartet played in the 4:00 slot. And I mean, they were, 1987, right? But suffice to say, I mean, they were great. I mean, they were just incredible. And Ron and I were like sitting there. And the first thing when Ron, and I say, this is the first big thing we'd ever done. And I remember Ron, he turned to me and he said, if somebody threw a bomb into this room, the guitar scene would be like wiped out, because like everybody was there, right? And so we heard the LA guys, and they were just, they knocked everybody's socks off, suffice to say. And I remember that night, Ron and I were having dinner, and we just reminded ourselves, like, once again, it's like, we know what we do. We know what we do. And like, that's what we need to do tomorrow. And we were not inexperienced at that point, but I guess we'd been together for maybe 2 years, 3 years as a duo. And we just reminded ourselves, and everybody, doesn't matter how experienced you are, you do need to have a talk with yourself sometime about like, this is what I do, and that's what we're going to do tomorrow. And we played the next day. It worked out okay. And I remember, and Adam, along the lines of what you were saying.
I was there. It was a great concert. I was at both concerts, and it was great. How old I am. I was there.
That's very kind. And we really didn't know that many people. And I remember after the concert, the LA guys came back, and they had these big smiles, and we didn't know them. And Adam, this goes along to the point of like meeting people and making friends. They're all our friends now, right? And I remember they all came back with these big smiles. And they were going like, wow, man, you guys, that was like really incredible. And they just were genuinely nice. And John Dearman said the cutest thing. He said, excuse me. He said, I don't want to be rude, but like, who are you guys? Because he said, I've never heard of you. And like, he said, where have you been? And it was really nice.
We are Pearl and Gray.
I have to add a little something to Julian's story about that. Is in 1981, I had the privilege. We were all at the Segovia class together, the LA 4, and back in those days when Anissa was in the group, and I was at the first concert that the LA Guitar Quartet ever gave. And you have to understand that every day that week, we'd either play for Segovia or get drunk, or play for Segovia or get drunk, play for Segovia or get drunk. And so it was on one of the days where I was supposed to get drunk. And oh, I forgot we have students here. I'm not supposed to say this, but I am anyway. And so in the that day, the LA Quartet was playing a noontime concert, and of course they were our classmates in the Segovia class, you know. So we were like, oh God, we could go to the bar, whatever bar that's open, or we could go hear the concert, and we opted, as we should have, to go to the concert. So I, to this day, and Bill and Scott and John know this all the time. I always tell them, I always remind them, I was at their first LA Quartet concert ever. So it's really and they were great then too.
Not to get off too off topic, Carlos, but Julian, that was in Tempe, Arizona, right?
That was at University of Akron.
Yeah, 86.
Oh, that was the 88 one. Yeah.
86 was Tempe.
Right.
Oh, 86 was Tempe? I thought it was 87. Oh, right.
I played in Tempe. I don't think I played in Akron. I was there in Akron.
I was at that concert then with Anissa. Anissa was at that because I was doing a master class I was in the Elliot Fisk master class in Akron. My dad and I drove there.
Okay. Yeah.
So in any case, in order to close off that segment on competitions and all the
boy talking about competitions,
yeah, all the amazing experience that you guys went through. I think this is my personal question. What are some things that you see happening when a student starts becoming an artist? What is the moment when you see that they stop being a student and they start becoming an artist? And maybe I would like to start with Dr. Zone, and then we can open it up.
Oh, so I got to go first on this one. Well, you know, the actual physical playing of the guitar is a real stumbling block, and it takes a lot of years just to make it comfortable in your hands. And I think a big part of when I see artistry emerge is when the instrument is transcended. I'm listening to music made that just happens to be on a guitar, and not, oh, that's a pretty good etude, or he finally got his slurs even. You know, I'm not thinking about those things. I'm actually in a different place. That might be a watermark for me.
I would say that in some ways, like the burgeoning artist is already kind of, in a lot of cases, are already artistically inclined. And I've noticed that it's, as Dr. Zone is saying, that it's the hurdle of getting around the technical things of playing the classical guitar, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do. I mean, that's why I love watching sports, you know, and that kind of thing, is there's so much analogy to it. To do something at there are not that many things that are at a performance level when when the moment is there, when you have to perform at a high level, quite like that in classical music and golf and the professional level of a lot of sports. And so it's a lot of that kind of thing is, again, you hear athletes talk about that a lot, where they feel like they kind of transcended all of the work that they did, the years and years of work, and they're not even, it's almost like they're in a semi-conscious state. They're in the zone and all that. So yeah, that's kind of where that happens. But I think the players that have more of an artistic kind of bent, they're sort of already wired that way, if that makes sense. They already kind of they often really have this very strong sort of directional type of thing towards where they're going. And it's really it's more or less a matter of time, if it happens, that the instrumental, the physical thing can become more second nature or organic, or more or less, not so much of a thing where they're thinking about what they're doing, moment to moment all the time. So
I think when you're thinking about artistic performance, a performer of high excellence, the issue there is that performance is an issue of integration, and a first-rate artistic performance is about integrating the physical, the spiritual, the emotional, the intellectual. Actually, that's one of the reasons I got into music, because I thought that I mean, I did really want a physical aspect to whatever career I was going to have for the rest of my life. But it exercises everything, and artistry is really about, it really is about integrating all of those qualities. And because everyone has their own particular temperament, individual temperament, it means that those things are going to be integrated in different ways. There's not one way to do it. I have to say, uh, when I see a student of mine, when I think that they're touching artistry, it's when they do something really beautiful and authentic that we never talked about. That especially if you worked with them over years and there are all of these issues, and then it's like, wow, that's a great idea, and we never talked about that. And that actually makes me the happiest. I mean, that because then not then like information becomes knowledge.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's almost like at that moment they're assimilating something that, yeah, that it wasn't even. It's not. It
You know,
wasn't a lesson or anything. That's amazing.
in a lot of ways, sometimes as a teacher, you think, okay, here's our relationship. I'm at 100 and you're at 0, and our goal is going to get to be here. So that when it's sort of to quote Caine in the old kung fu show. Now you are ready to leave the monastery, my son. Now you are a Shaolin priest. That kind of thing. And I think a couple of things about this. I think Andrew hit it right on the head when he said the music making, the playing transcends the instrument. For me, along the lines of what Jay was saying also, I talk a lot, especially with my students that are ready to have this discussion in their lessons. I think I spend more time on this than anything else now about music making, is these two concepts: music as a language and music as a three-dimensional art form. How we make our music three-dimensional through our use of all of our, what I call, tools in our elfin tool bag: dynamics, articulation, vibrato, color, attack, dynamics. You can name as many as you can name, and how the student learns to use those tools to maximize what's flat to making it circular, almost like in the movies where they start moving the things around on the computers, and they move them around, they walk inside and the computer's all around them, the holograph is everywhere. And so that the music, when you hear great playing, it almost surrounds you. Pick your favorite artist, whether it's Alicia De La Rocha or Yo-Yo Ma or Andrew Manzi or Nigel North. Pick your player. The music surrounds you, and it's because of how that person uses the language. They use the language, and of course, language changes just as language changes throughout periods. So how we manipulate harmony, or how we manipulate upbeats or downbeats, or weak phrases or strong phrases, all those things change in different periods, and how we look at whether tonality or atonality. And so learning the language. And so when I hear a student of mine, to get to the answer for me, besides what my colleagues have already said so brilliantly, is when I hear them using their tools, again, not just in the way I told them to do it, but in a way that now makes it their voice. It becomes their idea. And that's when I actually get my biggest, stupidest smile on my face. I kind of know, okay, you're ready to leave now. You're ready to leave the monastery because you get it. Now, again, I know, I'm sure Julian and Jay and Andrew are the same, that I never try to teach a student to play like me. I teach them how I view the music, and how I think about the music will infiltrate some more than others, get inside of them, and maybe then they come away with it in their own way. That's always the goal, because it has to be their voice, not mine. And I always take great pride when a colleague says, "Oh, I heard this student of yours and they played really great, and I could tell he was your student." I always go, "Why? Tell me why. What was it?" And they go, "Well, there's just certain qualities that I always hear in your students, and that's a wonderful compliment, And I always think about that for days afterwards. I was thinking, what is it about that one, And so I think all of those That's for me how I know that the person has sort of reached that next level, when they're making those decisions, when they're using the language at another level other than what I just told them to take a break there or breathe there or play louder there,
If they're achieving artistry, they're not going to sound like their teacher. That's
Right.
the great thing about it. You can't if you're teaching them to sound like you or to do what you do, you're not really teaching them anything.
Exactly. No, then you're teaching them imitation. Exactly.
I think, and also, Adam, along the lines of what you're saying, if you're working on interpretive things, that the point is to allow individual decision making.
Right.
I think over time, it's really important as a teacher that over time that you really do allow students to realize that they're becoming a colleague. I know some teachers, they never let their former students become a colleague, if you know what I mean. Like, and I think that if you really are going to have a relationship with students and over the long haul, that it's important to have those moments. And actually, when I have the first lesson with a freshman student, the very first lesson, when they sit down, I always say to them, okay, I said, here's something you need to know, like right now. Your professional career just began. Like your professional career is beginning now, in the first week of your freshman year. Because I said, if you think your professional career is beginning after you graduate, you're making a very big error. And I just point out to them, I said, all of the students here, whether it's Peabody or Shenandoah, but all of the students here and your teachers are they will be your future colleagues. So all of the relationships that you're making, and we've talked about relationships, like this is the beginning. And so you need to comport yourself now as a professional, because, it is starting now. And along the lines of what you just said, I mean, you were talking about teaching and your scale.
Right.
I think an ethical teacher is trying to make themselves obsolete.
Yeah.
I think Dr. Son wanted to add something.
Well, I just to echo a little bit of what's already been said. I believe in the fisherman principle, that it's better to teach someone to fish rather than eat for a day. And one of the things that won't surprise anybody who's been to my studio is the amount of time we spend on literacy in music and really understanding how to speak the language. There are traditions and expectations, and German Augmented Sixth Corps resolving, there are rules to that. And if you know what that sounds like, you can interpret it in a bunch of different ways. But if you don't know the difference between those two harmonies, then nothing means anything. Everything sounds the same. And so I think what's really important to get across to students to help them be professionals, because all of us are going to teach probably more than we play. Maybe not Jason, but he certainly teaches quite a bit. He's got 2 gigs. That in order to be an effective teacher, you have to master the language, and don't say, "Oh, play it this way because that's the way I play it," or "Play it this way because that's the way David Russell did on my favorite recording of this." It's about, I'm going into the score, looking at it from the composer's angle, getting closer to the composer, and really understanding why every one of those notes is on that page. And then a lot of the mystery is resolved. And then when you understand that, then you can teach it to somebody else, and then your students are going to get a whole lot better also.
I wanted to highlight a comment from YouTube. Mitchell Shodman, he said that he wants to say thank you for the wonderful inside discussion, and he wants to say hi to Jason. He said, Mitch from Artist Works.
I'll get back to your video this week. Yes.
And
Mitch is a student on Artist Works, the Jason video that Colin, Davin, and I both teach on. So Mitch has been there from the beginning. Great player, fantastic.
And I would like to follow up with a question from Julian Shalom from our own studio, going along the same lines. How do you get out of a musical rut? like getting different colors or changing up pacing or phrasing habits?
Just try different things. Don't be afraid. I mean, don't. I'm always trying like 3, 4 different options anyway. So I'm not. I think not getting too methodical actually about if you feel like you're getting into a rut, just do something different. I mean, just play something a different way, and don't be worried that if it's, it's kind of going back to what Andrew was just saying. If you the more literate you are, the less you have to worry about getting into a rut or sounding like somebody else or doing, like you're gonna be you. The more literate, the more you know how music is put together. There are literally thousands of ways to play a phrase correctly. There's not one way. If you understand the nuts and bolts of how the phrase is put together harmonically, rhythmically, melodically, inflection, and all that kind of stuff, there's an infinite number of ways to play it. So you don't have to really worry so much about, well, if I do something different, then it's not going to really be me. It's all going to be you. You're just doing something else. And I think to have confidence in that or faith in that is an important thing. You won't really, I never find myself getting into a rut. I just, if something feels stale, I just play it a different way. I mean, I think these guys, particularly, Julian, and more recently, and Andrew, for many years, I don't think they've heard me play the same piece the same way twice. It's not so much fun to do that anyway. It's a drag.
Well, and Jason, I remember this was at SUNY Purchase when I think was it NGW was there one year, and I remember you played a performance of the Decameron Negro, and it was utterly fresh. I mean, it was, and we've all taught that piece a lot, and it was such a pleasure to listen to because there were so many really individual choices, and it was a brilliant and totally satisfying performance. But everything about it, there was no cliche, there was no trope. It was like here's the piece. And Andrew, I just wanted to say, after your comment, you just gave, was it only last year or 2 years ago, like brilliant master classes at both Shenandoah and Peabody. And you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk. I mean, the way that you focused my students, like observational powers, like onto the score. Like why would you make this decision instead of this decision? And it let them do really authentic, independent thinking, with the score. So I mean, I saw that firsthand what you're talking about.
It seems like a century ago, but I'm pretty sure it was 2019.
Wow.
Anything to add, Professor Holzman?
Yeah. One of the assignments I very often give my students is to listen to 5 or 6 or 7 different recordings of the same piece. Talking about Julian's Rut, to listen to different artists who they might know and admire or don't know, just, good recordings of the piece. And tell me what's different about them. What's different? Why do you like that one? Why do you not like that one? What intrigues you? And this goes to very much what Andrew was saying, what I was saying before, is our job is to teach the student to interpret the score. So I always say to understand the score and then interpret it. And so I always say to my students in those recordings, which player said something to you? Which player made a case about the score and a statement from the score that made you say, oh, that's a hemiola. They're playing it like a hemiola. Those 3 people are not. Well, okay, is it a hemiola or not? And then ask yourself that question. How do they deal with the end of a section as far as a retard or not retard? Tempo. All these different issues. There's so many, as Jason was saying before, there's so many different ways to play a piece and to play a phrase that's part of the way that you develop your own style is by listening and learning and at first imitating. I mean, I have to be honest. At first we imitate and then we develop. I don't think we just develop like out of a chrysalis. We learn by imitating, and then we use that into our own voice, and this becomes a little bit of this and becomes a little bit of that until it comes out as yourself, you know. And so I think that playing things a different way, and Jason was talking about this earlier, is really crucial. I always say to my students, take the pasta out and throw it on the wall and see what happens. Play it faster, play it slower, play it louder, play it with a retard here, play it this way. And then I say, and then tape yourself doing that. Play it 3 different ways and tape each one, and then listen. And then you go, oh God, I hate that one. I hate that one. Oh, that one kind of, you know, that one makes some sense. And the other thing I tell them, and I as I've gotten older, when I can't decide what to do in a piece, I'll still listen to people that I respect as players, and I'll listen to them play a piece, and very often some of them will tell me what not to do, and then others will tell me what to do. Or I'll go, boy, you know, I couldn't figure out how to play that line or that phrase or that idea because it just, there's something about it that just I couldn't figure out. And then I listened to 3 players and I realized they can't figure it out either. They just play it. You know, they just play it, you know. And then I hear somebody, and you know, and I have a list of players who I consider the guys, the men and women who kind of do something. And I listen to their playing and I go, huh, that was interesting. Not me, but interesting. That was something, you know. And so teaching the student to be a better listener, because really that's what being a musician is all about, is being a listener. You can learn to listen, and then you can put that listening out, you know, once you obviously have the technique to do so, you know. So that's what I would say to Julian. I mean, trying, you know, all the things that our colleagues already said, but trying to not get in a rut by doing different things and listening to different performances. A lot of students will come in and they'll play something just like John Williams, just, you know, trying to play something just like John Williams, you know. And I say, well, that's, you know, if John Williams came in here, he'd play it better than that, but like that. But I don't want to hear you play like him. I want you to learn from him what you think is right, and then learn from these 5 or 6 other players. And I think that's very important. Young players tend to get in ruts. They only listen to this person or that person. You know, this happened to me, one of my fantastic freshmen, just literally last week. He came in and he played a piece that I had never heard of by Angelo Gilardino. So I say this to the group, it was interesting. And it was a piece of Angelo's that I had never heard, short piece, and it was an interesting work. It was sort of it was called Colloquio con Segovia, which was an interesting title, and it was an interesting little piece. And it had a lot of meter changes in it. And he wasn't really playing any of the meter changes. He just, when it was in 3/4, going to 4/4, he put a rest at the end of the 3/4 bar. And I said, well, you're making that a 4/4 bar when you do that, you know. And he's an incredible young player. And he said, yeah, but you know, I said, well, have you heard this piece? Is there a recording? Because I've never heard it. And he mentioned some great young artist who had it on his record. And I said, so let me get this straight. You listened to him play it, and now you're imitating the mistakes that he made. Just like that. And he looks at me and he kind of go, well, now that you say it that way, yeah. He says, because that's 2/2, and that's 2/4, and that's 3/4, and that's 5/4. I said, and you're playing them all the same. And so he sent me the link of what he had listened to, and that wonderful young player, who's a great young player, made the same mistakes. And I said to him, the wonderful thing about being me now is I'm not in awe of that young player. I can hear his mistakes just like I can hear your mistakes. And so look at the score and play the meter. And so the next lesson he came in and he looked at me and he went, yeah, I kind of get it. and I said, and I've listened to the playing. I said, and if I didn't have the score in front of me, I would have thought it was wonderful. Of the recording he sent me. Yeah, you know, and that's the interesting thing. But when you look at the score, you go, well, that's not what's written here. You know, so
the score is the authority. That's the only thing you can actually really count on. That's that.
You know, there are different kinds of ruts. I liked I mean, it's a good question, but that it could be like a rut can be a specific thing, like a physical habit, an interpretive habit. It could also be a general thing. But I think ruts, as I'm understanding that, ruts basically come from inattention. And there's a Zen saying you can either live 10 years or 1 year 10 times. And just, you know, like, are you having like 10 years of new experiences, or is it the same year just over and over again 10 times. But I think that, and Adam touched on this, but one thing I also do this with my students is like we do a lot of comparative listening, where I'll take a piece, everybody will have a score, and then we'll listen to 3 or 4 different performers. I often pick piano, um, sometimes because of interpretive literacy, and I say that in a loving way. But if I mean, I don't know. In rep class, a couple weeks ago in rep class, I was just saying, like, if you're going to play Soren Giuliani and you don't know the music of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, could you not? Like, I'm not trying to talk big. All of us are in a lifelong journey, but to expect that one is going to play Soren Giuliani in a significant musical way without knowing the music of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, and also like uh, really expressive performances of them by pianists and string quartets and orchestras. I don't think that's going to happen. And I say it like in a musically significant way. I was just working on the Giuliani Opus 15 sonata, and we were looking at the slow movement, and I said, I said, let's listen to the slow movement, because he was looking for the tempo for me was off, and I said, let's listen to the slow movement of Beethoven's Pathetique, and that got us on track. And actually, if you look at the scansion, it's also in 2/4. If you look at the scansion of the phrases, and the way that they flow, there's a lot of similarity between those two. Um, there's another kind of rut, which can be a physical rut. And Jason, you were talking about, we all of us, I mean, any professional has their routine that they're going to work through. But I think as you continue your career, you realize that routine changes. And I can remember, like, when I finished my master's, I had my routine, but at one point, I didn't have unlimited practice time. I started my first college job, and I had to totally I revamped my routine, because I asked myself, do I really need to practice that anymore? The things that you need to practice can change, and so certain things that were part of my daily routine, like, were no longer part of my daily routine because they were fully inhabited.
Yeah. I think actually, especially for more advanced players, I think those older systems of I have to practice a certain way, I have to play a certain way, I have to do things a certain way, actually really restrict them from getting to their next level.
Right.
You have to actually, in some ways, you have to kind of loosen things up and be able to play something a phrase or something a few different ways, because that's actually what then starts to expand the technical command of the instrument in a way that you probably didn't really imagine. And then going to Adam's point, like trying different things, I can't tell you how many, I mean, hundreds of times I've been surprised by something that, like, trying something different that I didn't think, sometimes it takes you a long time to get there, to that thing. And then you're like, you know what, this is good. This is it. I found it. I found the thing, or at least for this month,
Right.
I think also, and you, Julian, I think you touched on this a bit. It's very important, and it's hard when you're a student to see this, but when you've been playing this darn thing for many, many years, it's much easier to see it. There's a difference between a rut and a plateau. A rut and a learning plateau. And a lot of us are on learning plateaus, sometimes for 3 months or 6 months or a year or 2 years. It can be, and that's not necessarily a rut. It's a plateau where it's sort of, this is where we are now, and we're experiencing, this is how much range we have, and therefore we can take in this much. And then maybe that next year or 2 years later, we can now take in this much. Our own learning ability has widened, either because of a coursework or a life experience or a concert we've heard or series of concerts we've heard, our listening and our ability to take in and therefore grow in artistry changes. And I know when I was, because I started very young as a player, and so there would be long periods of times where I felt like I'm not getting any better. I'm not getting any better. And I had the great fortune of being, having an older brother who was my first teacher and who could see me from afar. And he'd say, no, you're a lot better. That you were on this plateau for a long time, and now you can do this, which you could never do when you were 12 or 7 or 10 or whatever age, And that helped give me, at that point, it was a verbal perspective that I didn't really appreciate or understand because I was too young, but at least it was told to me. But as I've watched many students, you see that all the time. You see a student not necessarily in a rut, but in a plateau, and they think they're in a rut. I'm not getting better. I'm not getting faster. I'm not doing this or that. And helping them realize that this is okay, but this is how we get to this next level, by thinking a different way and trying different things or experiencing different things. And a lot of times, it's very often a life experience, strangely enough, not just a musical experience, but we're not ready to play at that next level yet because we're not ready to be at that next level yet. Right. And if my wife were here, she'd say we're still waiting with me to get to that next level. Just being adult. But in general, I think that that's an important thing to differentiate, because what Julian's saying about certain type of practice ruts, Julian the student, is very true. But I think that there's a lot of these different discussion points.
I like that. I like the distinction between the difference, because, and also just to add briefly to that, there were certain things that you did to get to, actually the beginning part of the plateau is rather nice. And
right.
You can enjoy it. It's a new height. And there were certain things or systems or processes and stuff that got you to that, that got you up and lifted you to that point. So at the beginning of that, it's kind of nice to sort of look around, I guess, in a way. And you don't even know it when it's happening. What makes it feel like a plateau or a rut is it starts to become stale after a while. And then you're waiting, if you want, you're sort of waiting. Well, why am I not? Okay, it's been X amount of time. Why am I not? That to me, I think almost you can entertain more experimentation or things. You got to try something. You got to do something. And listening is a big part of it. I think taking in other interpretations or other things, or just listening is a big part of that for sure, because then when you listen to something, you're going to be inspired you may even be inspired to try something. It's going to move you out of that sort of stale place that you're in. You have to do something.
So I would like to change gears. When I received the questions, I realized that we could divide the conversation in 3 parts. The first one being the audition process, the second one being when the student is actually in your studio. And now moving on to the new section, we're going to talk about what are the things that you advise your students to do after they graduate from your studio. So one of the questions that I received in Facebook, and it's anonymous as well, is the following. What advice would you give someone who is about to graduate and start the journey of having to study without the guidance of a mentor or instructor? And how would you advise them to stay focused without falling into the trap of being complacent with their own musicality and playing ability?
I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think like having that conversation at the very moment that the student is getting ready to graduate is a little bit late. A little bit late in the day. Yeah, that the kinds of conversations that one would be having with the students that are in your responsibility, that it's preparing them for that moment. Well, it's a constant preparation over years of constantly making individual decisions, putting these decisions in front of them as decisions to be made constantly in their work, so that precisely when they do graduate, it's like you don't say have a good life. I mean, like it's so I guess, but I understand the question, but I mean I think all of us. I think all 4 of us have been, talking about the independent work that we all think is necessary in order to be an artist and to be a performer. So that should be in front like all the time. It's not to say that you wouldn't have certain kinds of discussions at different years, and maybe in graduating as well. But yeah, I mean it's too late to have that big of a conversation.
And also, if one is worried about being complacent, I mean, you're kind of in the wrong business. I mean, it's really it's not really for the faint of heart. I don't think. I mean, the music business. I mean,
Yeah,
really not like you're gonna be if you. I mean, I don't know. I just don't really imagine. I don't really know anyone that's really been successful in it that had to worry about being complacent. It's just not the thing. And then to Julian's thing, I think putting situations when you're in a lesson that may seem at the time really a musical or technical thing, if you can relate it within the context of because in this situation later on, like chamber music is great for that because it's like, okay, you're doing this here, you're going to watch for this or a concerto thing. This is the cue because when you're on the gig, da 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 da, like that kind of thing is really helpful because then they're like, you're not just saying it because that's what you do. That's what everybody does. Like that's the business. That's the the business of being a professional musician. So
yeah, I think a couple of things along this line. Number one of the questions I always ask my students, like Julian at the first lesson, not always first lesson, but very often at the interview, I say, where do you want to be in 5 years and where do you want to be in 10 years? Who are you? Do you know who you are yet? Probably not. But start thinking now of who you want to be. And that leads into the other point, and I talk about this in studio class a lot. What does success mean? What does success mean? Because if success only means playing 80 concerts a year, that's a difficult thing because not everybody's going to get to play 80 concerts a year. And for a lot of people, that's not success. I always tell the story of my father who was in the restaurant business his whole life. And when he won Best Pastrami in New York, pastrami that he made in the New Yorker magazine, for my dad, that was success. That mattered. That was a big deal for the family in 1974. And it was some darn good pastrami. And the point being that what you do as well as you can to the best of your ability. And not everybody's going to be performing on the road all the time. And one of my favorite things to talk about is all of my incredible former students who are not necessarily the incredible group like Dr. Z, who are incredibly successful performers and teachers, but the ones that own recording studios and have 7 Grammys and have a $3 million soundboard in front of them and still write everything first on their Yamaha G10, which they had in their lessons when they were an undergraduate. And the students of mine who run Guitar Alive, a successful radio show, or a student of mine who runs the biggest guitar society there is, or a student who played on the road with John Fogerty for 20 years as his lead guitarist. Each one of those stories is a success story because it's somebody doing what they found was their love. They found their direction. They found what they loved. I have one former student who runs 2 schools in Austin and has 200 students in one school and 250 students in another school. He comes into I teach his daughter. He comes into a lesson one time and he says to me, he goes, I have more ability to do stuff than I've ever imagined. I have more money than I've ever seen. I can't imagine that I would ever be this successful. And it was he decided in the end of his study, that's who he wanted to be. He wanted to open up a music school with his wife. And they're so happy, and I see them all the time because I teach their daughter guitar. And success is doing what you love to do and being able to do it. Being able to do it. And so that's my definition. And that's why that is so important. And when I talk to students in the beginning, who are you? Why, one of my favorite questions is, why do you play guitar? Why do you do this? Because you better know why you play guitar, because you're going to play an awful lot of guitar. And you better love it. I mean, as my wife always says, my guitar's right here, she always says, that's your drug. You know, when you're down or you're not feeling right or and you play, you become you again. You know, it just makes me happy. You know, good practice session, bad practice session. I love to play guitar. And you better know that about yourself. Or you better know that you love to perform. Or you better know that maybe that's not what you love, but you love to teach. You know, and I think all of my colleagues would agree, after 30 something years, 35 years of university teaching, I am so much more excited when I hear one of my students give a great concert than when I play a great concert. It's not even close. It's not even, when I hear a student who's made real success in their playing, who's made real achievement, I'm just like, I mean, you know, my wife will say, I'm like up all night. I'm just thinking about it and how excited that makes me. You know, if I play well, that's great.
You remember that feeling with when it happened with you, like when you made a big leap and then it was manifested in the playing, and it's like, yeah, and then you're seeing it when that happens.
Yeah, that's because for me, you know, I've always loved teaching, and as I've gotten older, I love it more and more. It's a sharing of something that I feel I actually know something about. One of the few things other than Yankee baseball, and I can actually share it. You know, and when I see that student achieve and get better, that's just, man, that's just gravy. That's it. So again, and Jay's point is really crucial. I'm just going to tell a little story. I'll try to be brief. I apologize for not. They brought me in about 20 years ago. They asked me to talk to the doctoral students at UT, just a general doctoral group of students, about how to get ready for the real world, you know? And there was doctoral students. And the first thing out of my mouth was, if this is the first time you're thinking about this, we are way too late, you know? Just like Jay's pointed earlier. And that kind of got me off that committee really quickly. They didn't want me. And I said to my colleagues, I said, you got to do a better job than this. You got to do this with freshmen. You can't do this with graduate students. It's too late. They have to be thinking about this. And so it changed the ethos of the school in a way, and that was a healthy thing, you know? So I think that's what Julian was talking about earlier is so crucial. From the beginning of study, the student has to find who they are, you know? And what drives them, what excites them, what do they love about this? Is it teaching young kids how to play? Is it teaching older people how to play? Is it playing small concerts, you know, running a nonprofit? There are so many different outlets, running a school of music. There's so many different outlets, a music store. There's no bad choice if that's what drives you and makes you successful. As long as it's good for other people, it's a good thing. I'm done.
Great. Following that same conversation, I have a question from Riley Smith, my colleague right here. He asks, how was your experience getting out of school and trying to form or inherit a university guitar program? Is there anything you wish you would have known in hindsight?
The first college job I got, and I was supremely lucky. Like, I graduated, I got my master's, and I remember I was graduating, and it was in May, and as I was getting ready to graduate, I remember thinking, I don't have a job, and that was a very bracing feeling of weightlessness. And then through a series of kind of fortuitous events, that summer, I got hired for like pretty much a full-time teaching job at a college. And I remember, so in terms of preparing, Carlos, of what you're saying, I remember saying to myself, and I taught before, but this, you know, it was going to be a college like teaching program. It wasn't Peabody, that came like a few years later, but I remember thinking to myself, if you mess up when you practice, you're just like hurting yourself. But if you mess up when you're teaching, it's like hurting other people. Like, you're doing damage to other people. And I thought, like, you know, like, this is a big responsibility. So I actually sat down with a legal pad and a pen, and I said, okay, I'm going to take stock of everything that I think I know. Because I realized, like, when I was starting that job, I wanted to be really organized in terms of, I mean, not that I was not organized in my own work, but so I wrote down right hand. And then I just wrote down like everything that I thought I knew about right hand. And then I wrote down left hand, and I wrote down everything that I knew about left hand, kind of not in a linear narrative, but in a just an outline form. Then I wrote practice, tactics, and strategies, and I wrote that down. Then I wrote interpretive shaping, and then I wrote down and so I basically started to like kind of form basically like an abode, like a place that was going to be my conceptual office that I would be working out of. And that was one thing that helped me, because it helped me to define what I knew. It also helped me to define what I should know better. I mean, that's one thing, but I do think it is a big responsibility when you're taking over the instruction of others. And certainly, look, I mean, the things I didn't know my first year in teaching, what I found is that, once again, talking about a rut being caused by inattention, you just have to be really observant of what was happening. I'll give you a concrete example. Year one, when I was teaching, in college, I noticed that whenever I said the word no, like N-O, in a lesson, like if you say, like, even if it was casually, like in a friendly way, no, not that way, I would notice that, I don't know if you can see this, but my students' eyes would narrow a little bit, like kind of like that, like, you know, and just like slightly, and then I realized that, yeah, because even if you say it in an affable way, when you say no to a person, you're negating them. And so I actually expunged that word from my vocabulary. I didn't say no anymore. And first of all, no's a lazy word. Like, don't say no, say, what do you think will be the way to do it? Like, and so that was the kind of thing, once again, I just noticed that people, I mean, think of it, like, if you see a friend or something and they're talking, just like looking them in the eye and go, no. And like everyone just instinctively covers up. So for me, that became a really important part of, like, okay, I'm going to find a positive way of working with any idea and not start with like negating. I mean, that's just that was a nuts and bolts thing. But you know, you have to watch yourself teaching. Everything a teacher does, everything should be on purpose. Every single thing you do should be on purpose. So if I have a student come in and I ask them, you know, how was your week going? And I find out what they're interested in. I mean, part of it is to create like a human connection. But the other thing is, I'm going to leverage, believe you me, I'm going to leverage every single thing that I find out about that student in their instruction on guitar.
How about you, Professor Holzman or Professor Viol, Dr. Zone?
I mean, like Jay, started very young. I was actually in the middle of my, I guess, doctoral program when I had my first job. And it was as if you'd thrown me in the deep end of the pool. I was 24 years old, I believe, and it was not at the University of Texas. It was at the University of South Florida. And I was, you know, and I could really play, and I traveled a lot and been very successful. And then I had to tell somebody how to actually play better physically. And I realized that I learned to do that when I was so young that I had no real memory of that. None. I mean, I had a great teacher when I was 7, through when I was very young, and I could always sort of just play. And so it hit me like a ton of bricks that I have this job and I don't know really what to do. And luckily I had a brother who, well, not always the most talkative person, I could pry things out of and get him to chat about it. And then I had an interesting relationship, because he was never my teacher, but with Mr. Shearer, with Aaron Shearer, and who'd known me since I was about 19 or 20. And while I never had a lesson with him, he was always very open about sharing ideas with me. And while we didn't always see eye to eye, in fact, often we didn't, I learned a lot from his ways of thinking about teaching and ways about technique. And so that kind of got in there with what my brother taught, and it took years for me to really sort of search through that to know what I would teach and how to make that mine. Just sort of like playing in a lot of ways, what we were talking about. But so when I went out to my first job, and I remember also calling my brother in regards to playing when I was out on my own. I remember calling my brother one time and I saying, God, not having somebody yell at me every week or tell me what to do, this is hard. I'm used to having somebody tell me what to do. I was 25 or 26 at this point. And he said, well, tape yourself. He said, tape yourself and be your own. You're ready to be your own teacher. You know that. And so that started a relationship with, in those days, just a cassette recorder back and forth that really helped a lot as sort of being on my own for the first times. And also that was that was a time where a lot of the things that I had learned with Oscar over the years as my teacher from 17 through 26 or so, 25, started to really settle in. So my own playing really changed a lot personally in there. But the teaching part, God, I was scared to death at first, Jay. I mean, really, I felt like I didn't know what to do. And I tried to take that inventory, and I wrote right hand, and I had nothing. And then I mean, because I really didn't have I couldn't remember really what I did. And I would look at what I did, and I go, well, that's kind of weird. Would you teach that? And, and so that was very hard for me. And I had to go through a real process with both my brother and Mr. Shearer, who was very kind to me as a mentor in those days. So.
How about you, Professor? Oh, Dr. Zone, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the question was, what's the piece of advice? Is that what we were talking about?
Yes.
Well, I often tell, and Riley, I haven't told Riley this story yet, but he's going to hear it right now. The story about how I got my university post here at CSU. And it really comes down to flexibility. Don't already start making decisions about what you will and can and cannot do, because it's not going to get you where you need to go. Example, when I finished at Florida State, this would have been 1997, if I'm dating myself, I was scrambling around looking for something to do. I had a bunch of little tiny jobs, like 6 different jobs in different towns that were going to go nowhere. I'd be doing the same thing year after year after year, and I really wanted to have a place to plant a flag and to build a studio, which is, what I would have been able to do here, because they've been so supportive of guitar. Well, one job opened up, a part-time job at Birmingham Southern College, and it was like about 2 days teaching a week. But Birmingham was 4 hours away from where I was living in Albany, Georgia at that time. And so I'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and I'd drive for 4 hours. I'd gain an hour because the time changed. And then I'd start teaching at 9 until about 10 o'clock. And then I'd go stay with my in-laws who lived in Birmingham at the time. And that was a challenge. And then I would teach all day long and I'd get home at like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I did that for a year. I did it for 2 semesters. And all my friends were like, you are a crazy person. Why in the world are you doing this? Well, one day I'm in the office, the student didn't show up, and so I'm practicing and the phone rings, and it was a guy from Birmingham who went to CSU. He was a student, but he also lived in Birmingham, and he had a wedding gig that he couldn't do, and so he called Birmingham Southern and said, let me talk to the guitar teacher. So that was me, and luckily it was on a day that I was in the office. And, he talks to me about the wedding gig. I'm not really from Birmingham. So, that conversation ended. And then we talked for about another 20 minutes. And he said to me, you really should apply at CSU. We're trying to get our guitar teacher fired. We need a guitar teacher. You sound like the perfect guy to do it. And if I wasn't flexible enough to try to find a destination for myself, if I wasn't willing to drive that 4 hours, by the way, that was only one of my many jobs. Right? The next day I was driving maybe an hour and a half to another place. If I hadn't been on the other end of that phone, somebody else would have had this job that I have now. So, at the beginning of your career, you should be thinking of everything you can do and will do, and not what you won't and cannot do, because you absolutely have no idea where one thread will, pick up another.
Any thoughts, Professor Vio?
No, I just kind of just relate to what my colleagues said. I mean, I could definitely relate as with Cleveland Institute of Music. I think I started teaching. It was weird for me because I got my bachelor's degree in '95, and then I was on the faculty in '97, and so I was about, I guess, 24. And teaching, in some cases, students were older than I was. So yeah, having that feeling of feeling of insecurity, like what you're saying, relating to what Adam was saying, is like, well, I've got these kind of quirky things that I do. Like, I mean, I don't want to really show them. It's not really necessary to show them that or to talk about that, right? You really have to start taking inventory of like exactly what the fundamentals are, and how, and knowing the difference between what you do well and with fundamentals and then where you deviate from fundamentals. and those kind of things is really was initially a challenge. And then to just kind of jump on, what Andrew was saying. Yeah. I mean, I love telling this story because it never fails to surprise students that I was playing wedding gigs and background music gigs and restaurant gigs, classical, jazz, pop tune arrangements, well after the GFA. That's, that's just because you got to pay the rent.
Well, I realize that we're about 10 minutes before 5, so I have one miscellaneous question from Juan Luis from Mexico. And he asks, how do you search for new compositions, if at all? And what can a 50-year-old composer do to get his music heard by great guitarists like yourselves?
I'm just going to answer that very quickly because I've never really had to. I printed out these questions, so here. Question for the search for new compositions. I'm sent a lot of them every week, so I don't really have time to look at most of them. If I'm interested in a composer, I try to start a relationship with them. I've not really had to look. I've been very fortunate. I've been very lucky. I've not had to really commission the things that have sort of come out on records or things that I've like the Leshnoff Concerto, Dan Visconti, Vivian Fung, Jeff Beal, the Pat Metheny thing. So I'm not really the best person to ask, I think, with this. And I think if you want somebody to but I will say, to answer the question, I have, if you're looking for somebody to hear those things, I mean, sometimes it's, it's good to, to offer, I have played things that I was paid to play. And then if I didn't feel the project was worthy, I would direct them to 5 or 6 other people. So but again, it's sort of, my situation was, I was really looking not to have to really look for things. It was always sort of, it was more like a pick and choose kind of thing for me.
Great, thank you for tackling that question. So I would like to maybe hear some closing remarks, maybe advice to, again, closing thoughts on advice for students on how to continue their studies and continue developing their careers, kind of to close off this conversation and any ideas. So maybe we can start with Dr. Zone again, and then we'll go off from there.
Well, I think that an important thing is to realize that it's not good enough to be as good as everyone else. You have to stand out in a crowd in order to get some traction in your career, which, goes back to everything we were talking about developing your own artistry, et cetera, et cetera. But, there's just an immense amount of work that has to go in at the beginning, especially. And if you're not passionate about this, that you're going to work twice as hard as most of the people in America who are going to make more money than you, doing less work, then you got to find something else. And but if this is what you want to do, I think it's very, very possible to make a career in music, even classical music in America, which sounds crazy on its face. But that's not going to come without the 10,000 hours and without the million emails that you're going to send, and making recordings and get like if you don't get that kind of foundation, it's not just going to happen to itself. You don't open up the newspaper and the classifieds and said wanted classical guitarist for budding performing career. That just doesn't happen. You have to make your own success happen.
Professor Gray,
I feel bad about our 50-year-old composer. I wanted to just say something for him or her. It was Juan Luis, so him. A composer needs to find players who will champion his or her music, and that's really important. They need to find usually a really first-rate young player who's also building his or her career. And link, and if it's obviously we're assuming it's a good composer always. And if it's a good composer, that young player is going to get excited to have a new piece to play. Because I know with my great young students, I'm always encouraging them to find the next piece, like we all did when we were younger, and so I would really encourage that composer to link up if he's in Mexico City with one of the fabulous young Mexican guitar players and get them playing his pieces, and then people like us hear that at a lesson or in a concert and we go, wow, that's a great piece, and the next thing you know, your whole studio's playing it because it's a really cool piece, and then you're working on the third work of Roland Dion's, or the third work of Jose Luis Merlin or any composer that we know so well now, So I felt like we should.
Thank you. That's such a great advice.
Can I also add on to that a recording is a much better calling card than a score. To take a score and to really penetrate it, to see what it's made of, you got to put a lot of time in it. And if you don't know what that sounds like, you're probably not going to spend the time.
It's not going to happen. And thank you, Adam, because that's the thing I was saying was about if I bring that to we've both had students that have taken those compositions much further, than we would have been, we would have had the capacity to do.
I have a buddy who's a magnificent cellist, and he's one of the guys who Yo-Yo Ma sends new works to look at. Because Yo-Yo gets so many scores, he has a group of friends and colleagues that he sends the scores to, and he says, if it's good, send it back. And so my buddy says, I look at it, it's either good enough for Yo-Yo or it's not, but it's still a good piece, And so I always think that's a funny story at the highest level of our performing world, So I can't remember, what was the other question what was the final question that Andrew was answering before? What was that? Can you ask that again, Carlos?
Closing thoughts, advice for students to continue their careers and so on.
Oh, be ready to hear no and always look to hear as many yeses as you can. Because you're going to hear a lot of no's and you have to keep plugging through them to find the yeses. Because you got to work hard and find who you are in that world.
Yep, we probably get about 48 no's for every 2 yeses in the management business. I mean, that's just, you have to plant a lot of seeds.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. And perseverance. There's no one who has a career in any business that doesn't realize the importance of that, along the lines of what you're saying, Jason. Martha Graham said, be yourself. No one else can do it. So, I really, but success is a jigsaw puzzle. There isn't one bit of magic advice. A successful career is made out of, I think, many different components. One of them, Andrew talked about it, you do have to work hard. Perseverance, as Jason just said, happiness, as Adam said. I don't know, having a career in music and having happiness absent from it, what's the point? There is no point.
There's no way, because there's too much. there's too much. You have to be tough. You wouldn't do it if you weren't happy doing it. There's no way.
And so but really thinking, I mean, in terms of success, really looking at the different kind of component elements of the work that you need to do, and also use yourself. I mean, along the lines of that Martha Graham quote, like, think about your temperament, think about the things that energize you, and think about the things that negate you, and basically personalize them.
Great. So I would like to take a moment to thank all of you, Professor Holzman, Professor Gray, and Professor Vio, and Dr. Zone. In the name of the studio, Schwab School of Music, the Guitar Symposium, thank you so much for your time. It's really invaluable for all of us. And thank you for all of those of you who tuned in from all over the world, from here, from Columbus, from Brazil, Mexico, so on. Thank you for tuning in. And I would like to take a moment also to invite you to our events that are happening next. Today at 7:30 p.m., we're going to have the Lee and Zone guitar duo, which is conformed of our professor, Dr. Andrew Zone and Erdong Lee. And the second half will be played by Matt Palmer, virtuoso classical guitarist. And then tomorrow we will have another masterclass with Matt Palmer himself at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. We're going to have 4 fabulous players from our own studio. Then at 3 p.m. we will have a lecture on the music of Fernando Sor by Colombian guitarist Juan Felipe Avila. It's going to be very interesting, and we're going to open up a question and answer after the lecture. So please be on the alert to put in your questions on the chat, Facebook, YouTube, and we'll make them known to the lecturer. And lastly, we will finish the symposium with a concert by Isaac Bustos and Rene Izquierdo. It's going to be a fabulous event. So I hope that you'll be able to tune in. So thank you again for this conversation and all this time. And I think we're done for the day. So thank you so much again.
Carlos, bravo.
And thank you, Dr. Z. Thanks, Dr. Zone.
All right. Always a pleasure to see you, gentlemen.
Good luck
and
tonight.
thank you to the recording studio for making this happen, Dr. McCabe and
Absolutely.
yes, and all his collaborators. Thank you.
All right.